Hi everyone, my name is Yarrow and you're listening to the Creative Nature podcast. I wanted to do a kind of roughly solo episode for a little while and I think today is the day. So thank you so much for joining me. I want to talk about navigating the pandemic as a survivor. I have thoughts about personal space and memory and navigating anxiety, all those kinds of things. I'm not going to be talking about anything graphic today, so I think, just wanted to give you a heads up for that. And before I start to dive in, I also want to remind you of the grief tending session that I'm running on July 31st. So you can sign up for that for free. I'll link to it in the show notes, and I would love to see you there. Okay, so where is this coming from? I guess I am thinking about touch as a love language and also as a source of trauma and pain and anxiety and questions of identity at the moment. I'm recording this in mid-July. Oh my God, time. In mid-July in the UK, and it's a weird spot in the pandemic. I think there's a sense of exhaustion. There's also a lot of sense of chaos from the government, a lot of mixed messages and things moving around. And I feel a real lack of clarity that makes me quite angry, actually. And our numbers are quite high at the moment. I think the last time I checked last week, 1 in 100 people in Scotland, where I live, currently had COVID. A lot of people are vaccinated, but a lot of people are not or not fully vaccinated. I only had my first shot so far. And so, yeah, it's summer. It's certainly easier to be outside and meet friends that way. But the new variant called Delta that we're dealing with at the moment is a lot more infectious. So I think we're still learning about exactly what that means. And it's certainly making things a little bit more complicated. So I guess I'm just saying all this to kind of contextualize where my thoughts are coming from at the moment. I think as a person, I've long seen touch as a love language in my life. It's really important to me to be affectionate with my friends, with just people I love. And so I've really been missing that. And this year in particular, after the accident I had on New Year's Eve, I've mainly been touched by medical staff in ways that weren't always pleasant, often actually painful, and really just kind of made me miss the kind of touch I really wanted even more. Sometimes I think being in my home, which I really love and feel so grateful for. I have a little garden. It's more like a yard. It's really not very big, but it's probably the best for me right now because I'm not a very experienced gardener. I'm very keen and excited, but I don't really know what I'm doing. So it feels like a small, manageable space. Has a lot of light, and very friendly plants and a lot of moss. And it's also kind of a bit not hilly because that makes it sound very big. I just don't know the English word. I guess it's not flat, it's just, it kind of, you can roll a little ball down my little patch of green very easily. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm often lying there just looking at the sky, and enjoying the quiet and the bird song and the sounds that the trees make. And there's really, in a way, nowhere I would rather be right now. And it's made being in this time so much easier for me. And I wish that kind of outside space for everyone. And also, I think being here and having my world become so small, because I wasn't really able to walk for most of the year so far. I sometimes felt like a spaceship, like you're just kind of in this capsule, that you're not really leaving, and it has this window into the outside world. Actually, from my bedroom window, I can almost look over to the city, Edinburgh, across the water. But it feels very removed, and so yeah, working here, being here, eating here, being with my dogs, it has felt like I am an island in a spaceship basically. And the other day, actually on the new moon in Cancer this weekend, I've been thinking about what this does to me in my sense of boundaries and protection and how I'm navigating relationships with other people as well. And while this has been difficult and I don't want to downplay that, what I noticed was this real sense of kind of joy and excitement to see that I'd become so much clearer on where my body begins and ends, if that makes sense. I think in the past, and I've heard other people say this as well, sometimes it's hard to know exactly what our edges are and what we want in relationship to other people. And there was an issue in my bathroom, for example. So I fixed that myself now, which I'm very proud of. But briefly, I considered having to call someone in. And it seems so strange to me that someone I'd never met would come into my house, especially into my bathroom, which is like the most private space together with my bedroom, I guess. Not that there's many different spaces, but it just felt really extra private. And my whole body was like, no, I really don't want this, I don't want a stranger in my house right now, but I need to get this fixed. And I don't know, maybe this sounds like a really small thing to you. Maybe it's an odd thing to record a whole podcast episode about, but I'm also noticing at the moment that I really enjoy hearing about other people's reflections, and something in that really gives me hope. So I wanted to take this apart a little bit more and think with you about it, I guess. Yeah, so this is element of like having been in my own space, in my own reality for a year and a half with so little interference from other people, and just recognizing that as a survivor, sometimes this kind of unwanted interference has really heightened my anxiety and kind of pulled me away from being really intuitive and embodied and knowing what I want and where I am and how I can communicate that. So I feel a heightened sense of that, and that makes me feel a little bit hopeful in amongst all these other things that maybe are more challenging than hopeful right now. I think there's this interesting push and pull between making meaning and wanting to create experiences for ourselves, but also often letting go and just floating and watching Netflix. And I think that, yeah, really hasn't stopped for me since the very beginning of all this. Wanting to be compassionate and knowing that switching off is really important and a way to process in the background in a way. But also looking back now and thinking, what have I made of this time? And I don't want to give into these like productivity narratives, and I don't think that we all need to learn new languages or whatever, you know what I mean, right? But I also know that when I can untangle myself from these outside expectations a lot, which is actually something I can do more easily in some ways right now because I'm not interacting with other people in real life as much, then I can see that there's this sense of wanting fulfillment from what I make in my life, right? Like completing something because I've set out to do it is actually a really nice feeling. And I think sometimes maybe in the past I've been so angry at capitalism and like so firm in rejecting these notions of productivity that I haven't really articulated that I also want to actually produce things in a way, right? And so without going too deeply into political theory and thoughts on labor and the philosophy of that, yeah, I'm just taking this moment, I guess, to think about the year ahead. There's the Gregorian calendar, which never felt quite right to me. There's the wheel of the year. But to be really honest, and maybe this is weird, but at the moment I'm really finding myself thinking in the academic years. So thinking about what's going to happen in September when this new academic year starts. I've enrolled at the Open University last summer to study philosophy, and that has come to an end last month. And I really, really loved it, like so much. I can't tell you. It felt like oh, I had found something that really stimulated and excited me, and I was able to do that really completely in my own space, in my own time. It could potentially have been an interactive experience for me. There were lots of opportunities to go to online tutorials and talk to other students online, but to be honest, I didn't really do that. I just spent time with these treasured books and was reading them by myself and then writing lots of essays and really enjoying that process. And so, yeah, at the moment, I'm wondering what I'll do in the next academic year. I'm not sure, and I'm really grateful that study here in Scotland is much more affordable than it is in England and in many other places in the world. I also have German citizenship where studying is free, and there's a couple of, well, not actually more than a couple, but there's a few distance universities in Germany that offer free programs to Germans essentially, and so I have a lot of opportunities that I feel really grateful for, and I want to make sure that I'm making any decision that I do make from a place of just genuinely wanting to learn rather than feeling imposter syndrome and thinking that I have to justify my work and that will never really be good enough. And really, to be honest, at the end of the day, I think sometimes there has been this feeling of me needing to earn my place in the world by being good and learning more and doing the right thing. And I wonder if that's, I don't, obviously this is something that everyone can feel, but it does also feel related to or tied to in some way to some of the painful experiences that I have had in my life. So I'm questioning that as well. There's a really funny word in German that I want to share with you. And I don't know if you know this, but German is a language that is difficult to learn, I think. It doesn't sound great to me, to be completely honest, but it is my first language and it has some really lovely qualities, one of which is that you can kind of stick words together to invent new ones. And so, one word that I've heard quite a bit this past year is Erlebnisdichte, which basically means the wait, let me think. The density of experiences that we have. And so the density of experience, the Erlebnisdichte is really low right now, for me at least, for many people, I'm sure. And that clears space, I think, for our minds maybe to process the past in a different way. I know that I had really intense dreams in the beginning of the pandemic when we were all in this really heightened trauma response, which I think is a whole other conversation possibly, but I wonder, like if you feel this way, but I definitely had moments in spring last year where my mind was freaking out, but my body was also like, oh, we know this feeling, this feeling like nowhere is safe and everything is panic and there's no certainty about what's happening next. I definitely felt like I'd been there before. And while it was hard, there was also this sense of like, oh, I find this difficult, but I also know my own resilience through times like this. And that's helpful. Not that I would want to experience that again necessarily, but yeah, maybe you can relate to this if you chose to listen to this particular episode. Anyway, so yeah, dreams. And I'm still having quite intense dreams at the moment, not in the way that I had in the spring, not at the same pace or frequency, but sometimes I wake up and I'm like, just how did my brain come up with this stuff? Interesting. And it makes me think about dreaming and daydreaming and both these things being a radical practice and how I wish for more imagination in so many areas of our lives right now, in our politics and the way we think about the future. This is just some random stuff that I'm going to share. I'm going to look at my notes and share some random observations around dreams and imagining the future that I made. And I really can't make any promises about that being coherent. But, in a way that is, for me at least, also a part of being a survivor is working in a very non-linear way and being okay with memory not always being chronologically tangible, to say it that way. So one of the things that I've observed, I had surgery on my leg again 3 weeks ago, which was a bit more difficult than I had anticipated, and it was a bit upsetting because more needed to be done than I had hoped, and that was painful physically, emotionally. I really don't like change. I found it hard to be in hospital anyway. And so it took me a little while to come to a place of, accepting that I was in a cast again. It's off now. And just being with the reality of what my leg is. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, okay, I found my thread again. So as part of me taking 2 weeks off after the surgery, I started using my old iPhone again, which I'm keeping in a somewhere in my house right now. The word is escaping me of the storage container. Anyway, name. And so I took that out, and because I knew I was going to work those 2 weeks mostly, I wanted to be able to send videos and maybe, scroll. I'm not on social media anymore, which is again a different conversation, but I wanted to, I guess, scroll through news, and I was, just wanting to be connected in that way in that time. And I'm really noticing how I felt much more distracted overall again. And I had kind of really hoped to finish a few books in this time off, and I did finish some of them. But overall, there's just so often a sense that reading on paper is really good for my mind, and yet I just look at my screen for so much of the day. And when will I learn? And is it really an effective use of my time to look at my screen this much? What does it do more to my body, to the way I process experiences that have been difficult? If, like this hospital experience was difficult, I needed to be distracted in some way. But maybe sometimes for me, being on my phone is just kind of drawing out this process of being with the discomfort and processing that. And I also really love books. I treated myself to a second bookshelf for my bedroom last week, which I assembled myself, very proud. This is usually the kind of thing, okay, this is a funny discourse, but in my dating, I'm very independent, I run my own business, I live by myself, fucking love it. But I have these sometimes slightly repressed fantasies about being rescued when it comes to furniture assembly, where I just want someone to come to my house and assemble things for me. So it was a big step for me to assemble that bookshelf myself and rescue myself, I guess. Anyway, it's up now. I'm looking over at it and I really love it. And in this intense loneliness and isolation and the potential of more of that coming in the future, in this winter, maybe next year, just looking at these books as it's each of them being their own little gateway into another world that I get to experience and use to make sense of my own experience and reflect in a very kind of non-confrontational way. I'm reading a book at the moment. I've almost finished it. It's so beautiful. It's called What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, 15 Writers Breaking the Silence, and it's edited by Michelle Filgate. Oh my god, you guys, this book has given me so many good tears, and it didn't force me to tell my own story or to confront my own memories the way I would maybe in talk therapy, which I also like doing, but it's a different thing. It just showed me other people's experiences. It gave me these like little glimpses into other people's lives and their traumas and the way that they've been neglected and hurt. And just the complexity of family life, I guess, and intergenerational trauma. And it allowed me to process a lot of stuff just kind of in the background by resting. And that was so beautiful. I really treasured that. And I want to, shift my attention more towards books and away from my phone, I guess. I've also noticed that it's been surprisingly hard to really take time off, and how in this past year and a half, I've often found real comfort in the structure of my work, and how, I work for myself. I'm mostly a web designer. I facilitate communities like the embodied business community. I run a program called Create and Launch at the moment. Really, really loving that, loving the people, just feeling so happy that I get to work with fantastic humans. And also noticing that this time after surgery now and back in January, um, yeah, time off is great. The spaciousness of that is amazing. But it was also hard, very confronting. And I noticed how maybe we've unlearned in a way to really be with unstructured days and be comfortable with them. And I definitely, have one or two of those a week, and I love them, and I love the quiet, and I love just pottering around my house, wearing almost nothing, occasionally going into my garden, dipping in and out of books, cooking from scratch. And a day like this will pass, and I'm like, nothing was missing. This was beautiful. But more than a week of that, it gets a bit edgy, doesn't it? And I really felt myself missing work and feeling worried about my low energy levels, which made total sense because my body was investing so much time and energy just in healing my leg. And so there wasn't a ton left. And then there immediately is this anxiety of like, is it gonna come back though? Am I gonna be able to go back to how I usually work, which isn't full time? And again, that's something I'm really grateful for and don't ever want to do again, ideally, if I can help it. But yeah, I was like, that's uncomfortable. um, hmm. I just looking at my notes now, thinking about what else I wanted to share with you. Yeah, there's actually a few more things. So I wanted to think a little bit more also about reframing experiences and how it's really uncomfortable sometimes to be with someone else's pain and grief, right? I see this in myself all the time. Actually, just yesterday, I saw this in myself where someone shared something with me, and I felt a bit overwhelmed and not good enough in how I was meeting their pain. And I'm also, experiencing that from other people when I'm in pain. It's uncomfortable. And we have very little grief literacy, I guess. And so, anyway, what was I going with this? Right, yes. So I think sometimes it is more comfortable when someone shares their pain with us to say, "Oh, have you considered looking at it that way? Or do you know about this resource? Or have you tried therapy or yoga?" And I think, not everyone does this. It's also pretty human. I'm trying not to be judgmental here about this kind of thing. That's what I'm trying to say. And sometimes a reframe is sincerely helpful. And also very often these things are very well meaning, and they don't always work in my own experience. And what I mean by that is that I think this past year and a half, again, not being around other people's energy so much and being able to be quiet and listen to myself much more, I kind of started observing my own process of reframing things and how it was so much more powerful and grounded and healing when it came really from within myself rather than it being suggested to me by someone else when I haven't asked for it. So to give you an example, I broke my leg really badly on New Year's Eve. I was unable to walk the first few months of the year. It was really painful. I might have some lifelong limitations. I had just had surgery again, all these things. And most of the time, I was met with so much compassion and people really wishing they could come physically and help me. I have a lot of friends who are far away, and I felt really loved up by them. and physically alone, but not alone overall in this experience. Um, but also, of course, sometimes um, I think it's just tempting to say, like, have you, maybe have you manifested this? And it's funny actually because 2 weeks before this accident, I did say um, to someone fantastic that I would love more of a challenge and to go deeper into this experience. And then, I obviously did in a really big way. But anyway, that's that's a whole other story. I think what I'm just trying to say is that sometimes a reframe was suggested to me in this incident and in other occasions in my life that I just wasn't ready for yet. And this year, I really made a point of like shielding myself from that, I guess, and just giving myself time and trusting that I'll come to my own reframe in my own time, and that will be the most self-loving thing really that I can do. And so this Saturday, for example, for the new moon in Cancer, I did this little ritual, which was very low energy because I was very tired. But it was so beautiful. I was dancing a little bit on my one good leg, and I lit candles, and I had really nice scents in the air, and I played some music, and I cuddled my dogs. And then I was sitting at my altar, and I was like, what if this is my wisdom leg? And it's really teaching me not to run away from myself or from things that are important for me to look at. And what if this is, yes, potentially a lifelong limitation, but also a lifelong cocoon of being able to say no to stuff that I don't want to do because I can't walk there. and Or what if it's like a compass that always tells me when I'm going too fast, or when I'm biting off more than I can chew, or when I'm rushing around too much? Like that would be, I have this like internal warning system now in the form of swelling and pain. And I'm going to have to be really intentional with where I walk and what spaces I navigate. And I'm gonna have to think about transport in the future. I don't have a driving license at the moment. I don't know that I want one. I'm a bit scared, to be honest. Um, but that's a whole other story. Maybe I want an electric tricycle for the future to get to the beach. I don't know. But those are, things that I will think about next year, I guess. But yeah, and it felt really peaceful, and I was like, I've really learned about my own capacity to be with pain this year, physical pain, and maybe this isn't the end of the world, and I got to know my body in a different way. I was so upset in the beginning to have all this hardware in my body because it felt really invasive, and I think that's again something that kind of hit me as a survivor. It hit those parts of myself that weren't really, that was just still upset that other people had invaded my space in ways that I really didn't want and felt really disempowered by. And now I had this accident, and obviously, technically hospital was a safe environment, and everyone was really professional and boundaried and had my best at heart, but it still felt really overwhelming to be touched by people whose face I could never really see because everyone was masked, and people weren't touching me in a comforting, reassuring way. Like there were no hugs or like a hand on my shoulder or something. It was always like twisting and turning my leg, taking x-rays, putting a needle in my arm, drawing blood, that kind of stuff. So not actually enjoyable. And yeah, I think that just brought a lot of stuff up for me, and to then have this surgery that I didn't really have choice about, like I could have said no to it, but it would have had massive consequences for the future of my mobility in my leg. It really wasn't actually a choice. I needed to have um, all this hardware placed, and my bone just wouldn't have healed otherwise. The break was too severe, and I do believe in physical miracles for sure. And I do believe that our bodies have so much more capacity to heal than we often give them credit for, but I also think like this was a pretty clear situation that that required surgery. And so yeah, that was difficult, and I found that painful at times. And it's just been beautiful to see that this all feels a lot more peaceful now. I can run my fingers over my skin and I feel each of these different screws, and there's 20 of them and several plates, and yeah, I can feel them, and they've become more of a part of my body than they have been in the beginning. And so I guess I just feel a bit more confident in navigating that kind of stuff and being able to breathe through it if I absolutely have to, and that is nice, right? Gosh, it's been a long waffle. We're at half an hour now. Thank you so much for listening. I want to say it's a really interesting thing to have this space to talk, because obviously this isn't really a conversation technically, but I have been running this podcast for so many years now, 5 or 6 I think, and I just really appreciate people listening. And I think there is an energetic conversation in a way, and sometimes you do send me emails and say you enjoyed listening to something, and I really appreciate that. I love it. And I'm sorry that this is maybe less easy now that I'm not on social media anymore. I will figure out a way to enable comments on my blog, so you can also comment on episodes in that way if you want to. But I want to end or close this episode by talking about what I'm wishing for the future post-pandemic, which I know we haven't really reached at all. We possibly haven't even reached a future post-lockdown yet, but we can already dream, right? So I really love tending to my home and my space and my boundaries, and I want to do more of that. That's something I really want to hold on to. I really hope that we'll be rethinking the way we work and the way we offer accessibility to ourselves and others. Obviously, working from home has been possible for so many more people, and there's a class issue as well. But I just overall really hope that we'll talk about the accessibility of our workspaces more, and that we'll also continue to be more intentional with how we approach our relationships. I think at this time I'm sometimes meeting friends at my garden, and I think because the logistics of that are so much more complicated, like how are we going to sit? How are people going to get there? Is it safe enough to use public transport right now? How many vaccinations have people had, and so forth. It's invited us to really be mindful of what we want from an encounter. And I really hope that that continues, and that we'll no longer do things just because everyone is doing them or because it's like a social obligation. And I hope that the clearing away of those things we don't actually want to do is giving us more time to think and dream and be critical of our governments and find oh, I'm sorry, that's my dog. He's alright. Find language around radical dreaming and restorative justice and what we want for our communities. And also, I think all of us have really loved being in nature as much as we could be through the pandemic, and hopefully that will translate into a really embodied understanding of this planet being the only one we have, and how can we act on that and really be with what we have already done, right? And maybe we'll also learn to confront trauma and pain a different way. I am German, and I come from a culture of denial in a way. Sometimes I feel, in one way, Germany has done a lot of work to do Vergangenheitsbewältigung, another great German word. It's kind of translates to the process of processing the past, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. And in other ways, there's still a lot of denial and a lot of intergenerational silencing and silence, I think, that's really tangible and that does a lot of damage to people and families and communities. Um, I've had many conversations with my grandmothers, for example, about where they were, how they experienced the war, what they were thinking as children. They came back to Germany just after the Second World War. And yeah, what was it like to be a teenager in the aftermath of that, I guess? And it always surprises me that there's not a lot of storytelling going on. And so, I wasn't there. There's just so much I don't know and don't understand, but I think questions are very important, and learning and really confronting that is very important. And I also see the damage it can do to avoid that, both in my family and in wider society. And so, not that the pandemic is comparable to the Second World War at all. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I think those are very different things. But it is a collective trauma, right? And so I really hope that we're not gonna repeat the mistake of kind of throwing this blanket of silence over what's been happening and in what ways we have been complicit and what we've been um, trying to do and how we've been showing up for each other in really loving ways as well. I think both the beauty and the pain and the trauma is something that I hope we'll be looking at together for years to come. Okay, I think this is where I'm wanting to end again. Thank you so much for listening. This was good to record. I feel like I needed to get this out of myself, and yeah, I'm feeling self-conscious just about how rambly these episodes can be, and I kind of like comfort myself with the thought that this is maybe an experience. The rambliness of mind, I guess, is something that I'm not alone with right now. And so I hope that if anything that you took from this, it was that you are too not alone in your rambling mind. Thank you.